Tonight, Celia has finally overcome its wind shear and is now intensifying in the eastern Pacific. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for June 24th. It's been a while since I've done one of these, but we are looking at June 24th. Today, we are only looking at one storm so far, which is Celia. Still a tropical storm in the eastern Pacific and looks to finally be intensifying as it heads off towards the west. We're looking at a potential Atlantic area of interest now, which could be developing. Right now, there is a 40% chance for this area of interest that is located just south of the Cabo Verde Islands. Looks like that it could develop as it gets closer towards those lesser Intensify islands, and models are going all out on this one, forecasting probably a hurricane out of this one. Very long range. We'll have to wait and see on that though. In the eastern Pacific, we're still looking at Tropical Storm Celia, as well as a 20% area of interest, which could develop behind this. GFS is pretty keen on that one developing. You'll see later on in this bulletin how that's going to go on that model, but nothing beyond that here in the eastern Pacific as far as Celia in this area of interest goes. Still nothing in the western Pacific either, though models might have something forming towards that day 5, day 6 point, so maybe we might be needing an area of interest here pretty soon. We'll have to wait and see on that as in due time, of course. Looking at the North Indian Ocean here, June isn't really late June, early July that is, isn't really a typical time that we like to see a storm here, or that we do see a storm here, so we're probably not going to be seeing much activity until September, October into November, so still quiet here in the North Indian Ocean. Taking a look at the eastern Pacific, this is all the imagery that I actually saved earlier today. You can see Celia there looking very fantastic now. It's been looking very wind sheared for the past 2 to 3 days, maybe even longer than that. But it's finally gathering pace. I know that I made a storm update earlier today saying that we could be seeing Celia make that 180 turn and start to intensify, and it looks like that is now the case. We'll have to wait and see what Celia does for us. Still forecast to become a hurricane though, so we'll have to wait and see if it ends up getting to a hurricane status. Looking at the North Atlantic here, you can see that area of interest just off the coast of Nicaragua. That could help our eastern Pacific system potentially form. We'll have to wait and see on that. But that wave is just off your screen. But that wave for late June is looking extremely healthy, I gotta say, as it pushes off towards the west. In the eastern Pacific, here's a more up-to-date visible imagery on Celia. You can see it looking very good, I gotta say, compared to its past few days. Certainly intensifying as it heads off towards the west. Would not be surprising if this is probably intensifying up towards 60 miles per hour right now, and it's at 50 right now. Looking at the western Pacific, general monsoonal pattern as far as I'm concerned. Not really seeing much in terms of any areas of interest just yet, but the models are saying that maybe something might happen towards that day 5 to day 6 frame and beyond. GFS in particular is very keen on that. You'll see here in a few minutes what it's producing there in the 18Z run. Looking at the North Indian Ocean, general monsoonal patterns, of course, here. Thunderstorms everywhere. It is extremely quiet here, and we're not really expecting anything significant here over the next few days into the coming months, I guess you could say, over into October and November, where we're going to be seeing probably development there. Southern Hemisphere, equally quiet. Winter pattern here. Looks like a pretty big front moving off the east coast of Australia over towards the southeastern Pacific. I imagine that extratropical cyclone lovers are watching these southern hemisphere pretty well, as it's that time of year, I guess. Sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific are hit or miss. They've taken a bit of a hit since Agatha occurred across the basin, really. Though the Atlantic is where it's at as far as sea surface temperatures are concerned right now. Pretty above average across the whole basin right now. And that's going to remain the case going into this hurricane season. Sea surface temperatures are only going to go up for the Atlantic, and that means that we could be seeing a pretty significant season, and we could be having our next named storm in a few days even. We'll have to wait and see on that. North Indian Ocean over into the South China Sea, very warm, but that's pretty standard for this time of year. These sea surface temperatures are around what we would expect for this time of year. Moving on over into the Western Pacific now, equally as hot. So if we do get a significant tropical cyclone in there, they will be able to take advantage of those waters, what I'm trying to say. We'll have to wait and see if a system does take advantage of that. But very hot over here in the Indian Ocean into the Western Pacific. And sea surface temperatures, I imagine, near the Philippines are only going to go up from here, like the Atlantic. Looking at the analogs here, you can see above average continues across the Atlantic, no surprise there. With the cooler subtropics, I wonder what that might have in store for hurricane season. Western Pacific, equally as warm, above average, across the whole basin really, though as you get toward the international date line and the southeastern part of the basin, they do drop off, of course. Ocean heat content looks to be well, the more favorable areas of ocean heat content look to be just east of the Leeward Islands into the Central Caribbean Sea, especially south of Jamaica. Though ocean heat content in the Western Pacific looks to be okay to good at points, especially in the eastern parts of the basin, but we're probably not going to be seeing anything there until maybe late on in the season. We'll have to wait and see. Looking at the computer models here for the Eastern Pacific, this is the GFS, looking at Hurricane Celia here. Looks like that it could be predicting maybe a mid-range Category 1 hurricane, maybe 80-85 miles per hour. But towards the end, you can start to see that other East Pacific system forming from our Atlantic thing. We have just off the coast of Central America entering the scene and maybe potentially becoming a tropical storm. We'll have to wait and see if it ends up doing that. But regarding Celia, looks like that GFS is very interested in it and making it out to be a pretty significant hurricane, though NHC forecasting 75 miles per hour on that right now. Looking at the rainfall threat, as far as any Eastern Pacific tropical disturbance or cyclone goes, it's probably going to be from our Atlantic area of interest that could develop in the Eastern Pacific. Looks like that we could be seeing a couple of inches there, up towards maybe 10 inches of rainfall in those mountainous areas, as it system makes it cross over into the Eastern Pacific and somehow helps this potential tropical cyclone develop. We'll have to wait and see, but heavy rainfall from Celia, not really much of a threat for the coast of Mexico. Looking at the longer range model runs here for the Atlantic, GFS is incredibly keen on this. I know that a lot of people are watching this extremely closely, and so are we. GFS in particular looks to develop this into a mid-range Category 2, maybe even a low-end Category 3 hurricane, though it is extremely uncertain right now. The best advice that I can give for this Atlantic system is just monitor the situation, and we'll have further updates as this system goes and develops. But looks like that we will probably be seeing a tropical cyclone of some sorts forming early next week in the Western Atlantic Basin. Over here in the Eastern Pacific, you can see that relatively small tropical cyclone getting some strength as it heads out into the eastern, or central Eastern Pacific, I guess you could say. Getting some strength, looks to be a low-end major hurricane there. Of course, that's incredibly uncertain, like we always say, but bears watching extremely closely as that system pushes off towards the west. Very small as far as Eastern Pacific hurricanes go, at least according to me, of course. Just going to plug our merch here for a second. If you need to visit our merch store for all your merch needs, we do have a lot of things on offer. You can scan that QR code and it will take you right towards that link. Well, folks, here we go. Western Pacific, what has it got for us? Oh boy. I've actually gone ahead and I've actually ran this from the hour 120 range and out just to see what it does. And you can see there, what the heck is it doing? That is, believe it or not, a 906 millibar typhoon heading towards South Korea. Probably not going to happen, but it is very interesting to see. Though that South China Sea storm that forms near the northern tip of Luzon and heads up towards Hong Kong, that actually forms between the day 5 and 6 range, and that's actually what I was mentioning earlier, that could have something, or could develop. We'll have to wait and see on that. Looking at the on this day, we do have, we had Typhoon Hao back in 1985, which made landfall in just east of Hong Kong in China. Killed a lot of people there. We also had Tropical Depression 6W, which would later on intensify and would become a familiar name for Atlantic tracking people, Irma, and that would become a typhoon as it pushed off toward the north and would, I believe, scrape Japan if memory serves me correct. But that's really it for on this day. I know that we just had a pretty significant typhoon. I forget its name, but it was a very powerful one that was weakening on this day back in the 1970s, if I recall correctly. So looking at the naming list here, on the next naming list in the Atlantic, could be about to occur, it would be Bonnie, followed by Colin. Last time Bonnie was used back in 2016 as a tropical storm that made landfall in the Carolinas. Next name storm in the Eastern Pacific also could be right around the corner. It would be Darby, followed by Estelle. In Central Pacific, I'm not even going to mention it. You already know what it is. It's Hone. Western Pacific. Next name could be Coming, if models are to be believed. Chaba would be the next name, followed by Air. Let's hope that it doesn't do what its 2016 counterpart does and be incredibly confusing to track. North Indian Ocean next name is Citrang. Next name in the Australian region will be Darien, followed by Ellie. In the Southwest Indian Ocean, if we somehow did get a storm before the naming list is over on July 1st, it will be Letlama, my bad. And the next name in the South Pacific will be Hale.